Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Show. It is early here. I think it's like 5 a.m. What time is it? Yeah, it's 5:40. There have been developments, and because there have been developments, real men can't sleep. Real men do the news. I finished cutting the videos around 3 something, and I saw on my text message, my mom was like, "Oh my God, they're attacking! They're attacking!" Iran has retaliated. They retaliated against the U.S. hitting their nuclear sites. Of course, Donald Trump over the weekend hit Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Um, as I pointed out at the time, despite the fact that Donald Trump was using this kind of heavily inflated language of how fantastic and awesome and emancipatory the strikes were and it destroyed everything and all of this other stuff, that the reality of it is those bases, the punch was telegraphed. And so much of the material, the equipment, and everything else that had been moved out, which is why there were no casualties associated with the strikes. Now, Trump doesn't necessarily want to own this, and they have been all over the place. If you're listening to Rubio, or for that matter, Vance, where they've been trying to obfuscate that very point. You didn't do the damage that you're claiming that you have done. Put that to the side for the moment. Either way you look at it, Iran said they were going to retaliate, and Iran has now retaliated. Where did they retaliate? They retaliated at let's say a command post, a base, one of the main military bases that the U.S. has in the region in Qatar, in Doha. What is it? Al Ubaid, I believe it's called. Ubaid or Ubaid military base. This is somewhat of a massive military base that the U.S. has. Now, this needs to be discussed. This needs to be discussed. In fact, I will read Iran's statement on it, and then I will show you the attack, and then I would like to break down the reality of the attack, what it means, significance. And it does answer a question that I posed. If you remember in the other video, I asked several questions because I didn't necessarily know what was going to take place. But the questions that I asked was, will there be a situation where Iran responds commiserate with the U.S. attack? And considering the U.S. attack wasn't overwhelming, then Iran's attack most likely would not be overwhelming. They're looking for parity. Will they do that? Now, there was a question about whether they would do it because the U.S. could look at it and say, well, we don't like the fact that you attacked us at all, in which case we're now on an escalatory ladder, which is what I believe that the U.S. effectively wanted. I wasn't certain, though. And it was very possible that the U.S. was not looking, or at the very least Donald Trump wasn't looking, for a long-term Middle Eastern conflict, even though the ultimate objective is to try to overthrow the Iranian government. So, Iran is attacked. Modestly. Now, I have to be honest with you, I wasn't certain they were going to attack at all. It's not about, let's take it from Iran for a moment and take it to Russia. Russia knows that there's military, US, British, French, in Ukraine. They know it. They may call themselves mercenaries, but they're effectively military. Russia will not say it. Russia will call them mercenaries. Russia will do strikes to kill those mercenaries, but they won't say it. Russia knows that the missiles that are being fired, the intelligence that is being given, is hitting Russia, is coming from the UK, the US. They know that the terrorist attacks that were taking place were coming out of the Brits and the US, but they are not launching attacks on London, nor are they launching attacks at France or Germany or anyone else. They keep it very specific because the goal is not to expand the war. The goal is to keep the war in somewhat of a box that they know that other people can't necessarily get in directly, and they can destroy the client and the proxy. Now let's move that logic to what's taking place in Israel. Iran believes, and I think they believe correctly, that in a one-to-one conflict with Israel, Israel will lose. That all things being equal, any long-term conflict between a country of 8 million people and a country of 80 million people, the country of 8 million people are going to lose. The amount of damage that a country of 80 million can tolerate versus the amount of damage that a country of 8 million can tolerate is dramatically different. Not to mention, the people in Israel have dual passports. They live somewhere else. And so are they willing to die for the Zionist cause? It's one thing if you're drinking your cappuccino while Palestinians starve to death and people get killed. It's another thing when your life is also in prize and you don't know if a missile is going to hit your area. You're sick of living in sewers, sick of living in bomb shelters with other people who haven't washed. That is not the life you may want. And so you may take it upon yourself to get on a plane, get on a boat, get on the fastest thing moving, and leave. I hope you get understand. Those are different scenarios. And so a war of attrition is not necessarily something that Israel wants. A war of attrition may be something that Iran wants. However, Iran does not want the U.S. involved. It's that. Now, the U.S. is involved. It is a direct participant because Israel can't do anything without the U.S. By the same token, you don't want it to be explicit and you don't want it to be direct, where the U.S. is getting further and further and further involved directly militarily into the conflict where you're dealing with two concerns. You want it to be very specific. You want to focus on your target. You want to teach them a lesson. Hell, you may even want to break them in a sense of this kind of Zionist control of Israel. That is your objective. That's what you want. So the U.S. attacks you. What do you do? What do you do? Do you go balls out and say, how dare you, sir? Now, you will wave your fists. You will pump out your chest. But are you really going to, fling missiles? Are you really going to go for the jugular? Especially if going for the jugular gives the U.S. a organic rationale to do what it wants to do anyway, which is to get further involved in the conflict. Now, the U.S. may want to peck at you to weaken you, but the U.S. also knows that it doesn't want a situation where Iran feels the situation is existential, where it needs to immediately go after the military bases, because contrary to popular belief, the U.S. and those military bases is also a weakness. If you're playing chess, the strength of the queen is a powerful piece, but it's also a weak piece if you get in the right position because of how powerful it is. I know it sounds, what's what I'm looking for? I know it sounds like a contradiction, but it is true. Because of how strong it is, on some level, it needs to be protected. You have all of these military bases that are in direct aim and target of Iran that they can, if they need to, hit with very sophisticated weaponry. But Iran also knows that if it does that, all hell may break loose in regards to what the U.S. can do. So both know that currently, under the current model to which you're operating, you don't want Iran to lose it and flip out. And Iran doesn't want the U.S. to get further involved. So what do? You need to overthrow the government. That's what you need to do. And you need to overthrow the government in a way that disallows it a justification and rationale for expending itself because of what's going on is existential from Iran, where it can justify those attacks on the U.S. bases or where it needs to make those attacks. By the same token, if you're Iran, you don't want to be in that position either, in which case you don't want to do anything that will put yourself in that situation. You want a very specific focus on an enemy that you know you can take out. So what does Iran do now that the U.S. has invaded its sovereignty and attacked? Well, it either ignores it and focuses on Israel, or it needs to show some level of strength and save face and attack in a way that doesn't, let's say, overtly give the U.S. a rationale and a reason to get involved. Now, that entails risk, because again, you can do that. Both people can understand this is a face-saving mechanism. But if the U.S. is looking to get further ensconced into the conflict, it can use that as a pretext to do so. It's a risk. Iran made the choice to respond, but to do so weakly, as a face-saving mechanism. I know a lot of people would say that's unsatisfying, but it is the correct choice. It is the correct choice. So TASM is pointing out, and I'll just read it. According to the defense group TASM news agency, following the blatant military aggression of the criminal regime of the United States of America against the peaceful nuclear facilities of the Islamic Republic of Iran and the clear violation of international law by the plan of Supreme National Security Council and leadership of the central headquarters of the Holy Prophet, the, quote, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, with the sacred code of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, has targeted al-Udeid or al-Udad, based in Qatar, with a devastating and powerful missile attack and Operation Bashar Fatah. Now, this, in reality, in English, is called Operation Tidings of Victory. Operation Tidings of Victory. All right, one last part. That's rather interesting, actually. Following the clear military aggression of the criminal regime, I read that part right here. With the aggression of the American enemy, it became clear to everyone that the evil of the Zionists was an extension of American design. Accordingly, we remind you that the national defense, the American bases, and mobile military targets in the region are not considered a point of strength, but rather a major weakness, a thorn in the side of this warmongering regime. Again, yes and no. It goes both ways. I know it seems contradictory, but strength and weakness can flip depending on the situation. They are pointing out, you guys are targets if we need you to be. I would imagine the US says you're a target if we need you to be. It's interesting, right? So let's go into the attack. Let's go into the attack. I want to add something else to this also. So this is, let's go through a few of these. These are going to be different angles. From my understanding, they fired about 14 missiles. Only one hit the ground. The other ones were intercepted. I would imagine these were ballistic missiles, not sophisticated targets. Oh, one last point. Iran gave the US a heads up that this was coming. There's that. Hey, by the way, we're going to attack your empty military base, just so you know. Be aware. Now, of course, they did this because they don't want any mistakes with any casualties. Nobody get killed, nobody get hurt. We just want to hit the hardware in order to show to our country that we're not going to take you attacking us lying down. And we can say there's parity, and we can get call this a day between you and I. Now, again, the issue here is we can call it parity now, not in long term. Long term, we're trying to take your government down. Iran knows it. But once again, if the US makes this existential, Iran responding to an existential attack would have no F's to give. And those 50,000 American soldiers, those boats and everything else that's out there, all that stuff will be fair game. And it won't be ballistic missiles where you get a heads up. It would be, we're trying to kill as many of those people as possible. We're trying to send as many of those body bags back as possible because it's existential at that point. Neither side wants to be there. They want to peck away. They have a plan. They have a strategy. If we can overthrow your government, we don't have to worry about those missiles coming after us. That's the objective. That's the plan from the US and Israel standpoint. Overthrow the government. Overthrow the government. So Iran responded here. I'll show this. This is that landed. Now, I don't really have any evidence that this hit a military base. Just to be clear. The angle doesn't allow us to see it, but supposedly this is one of the missiles that hit the ground. All right. Here's another angle for these flying into the sky, people running, hauling ass. I don't know where they're running to. Don't know where they're running to, but they clearly are trying to get somewhere. Here is another angle to this: missiles in the sky being intercepted right here. Because again, everybody knew where they were coming. Can you imagine looking up in the sky, there's missiles, and you know that if any of those things get through, it may take your life. Let's go to another angle. People running in shopping malls. And I don't mean to laugh. That's not my intention. It's just, does kind of look funny. They are terrified. They are absolutely losing their shit big time. They're losing their shit. Look, man, dignity at the end of life, right? I'm not saying that badly. I know this sounds horrible. But I think I've always said that if I'm going down in a plane crash, all bets are off. I don't need to be dignified. They are flipping out. Donald Trump, of course, will give his take on this. One of the questions that I asked at the time the other day was, if and when Iran does this for parity, because again, parity is subjective, what does the U.S. do? Is the U.S. looking to get involved immediately? In which case, we're now on an escalatory ladder because we're going to say you attacked our base. We don't care if you didn't hit anybody. We don't care if you told us about it. We're going to get involved. Or is Donald Trump going to say, you did yours, we did ours, call it a day? Now, just to be very clear, the call it a day is in the short term. The U.S. will find reason to get back involved, especially if Iran decides we're going to continue to peck away at Israel day after day after day. They will find a reason to get back involved. So this is Donald Trump coming out with his statement, being, well, himself. Iran has officially responded to our obliteration of their nuclear facilities. It wasn't an obliteration of anything. With a very weak response. It was weak, but weak intentionally, which we expected and have very effectively countered. There have been 14 missiles fired, 13 were knocked down, one was set free because it was headed into a non-threatening direction. I'm pleased to report that no Americans were harmed and hardly any damage was done. Mostly importantly, they've gotten it out of their system, and they will hopefully be no further hate. I want to thank Iran for giving us early notice, which made it possible for no lives to be lost and nobody to be injured. Perhaps Iran can now proceed to peace and harmony in the region. I would enthusiastically encourage Israel to do the same. Thank you for your attention on this matter. Now, I strongly suspect Iran is not going to go for peace. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. Israel, some of the reporting is coming out, wants to sue for peace. Obvious reasons. Again, a country of 8 million people. People are fleeing, trying to get out of the country. You have the safety of Israel has been pierced. Haifa, Tel Aviv, I would imagine elements of Jerusalem or parts near Jerusalem or in that area. Some of the military bases, military headquarters, those places have been hit. And if you are living in Israel, how are you feeling right now? Living in sewers, bomb shelters, with birds ripping your flags off of the flag stands. I would imagine that is not necessarily a great place to be. Now, Israel is saying if Iran, stops attacking us and offers peace, that's not going to happen. You attack them. You attack them. They are resolute. Their country is behind the government on this. In fact, they were out there celebrating when the government launched this attack at Qatar. Now, the Gulf states, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, shaking their fists. We condemn this, of course. But again, the attack wasn't on Qatar. The attack was on a U.S. military base. There's a difference in those things. If I'm in an airport The airport is not exactly the country. The airport is something else. But if I'm at a U.S. embassy, then I'm technically on U.S. soil. So this is a U.S. military base that just so happens to be in Qatar. It wasn't an attack on Qatar. Also, it's pretty fascinating that the same level of gumption, level of ire, wasn't aimed at the Israelis as they were murdering Palestinians, other Arab Muslims. Isn't that interesting, right? So you have Qatar saying we may respond, Saudi Arabia, UAE standing with Qatar on this, and you have Iran who's beating back a new iteration of Nazis and who responded to an attack on their own home soil. Now, again, I don't trust any of these governments, nor do I trust Turkey. Turkey worked with Israelis to knock down Syria. I don't trust Erdogan. He's a snake. And Saudi Arabia, these Johnny-come-latelys are only saying they're not letting their airspace and everything else be used, despite the fact all of these military bases of the U.S. are on these places, or in these places, because they don't want their oil fields to be hit. And they know if shit hits the fan, their governments up in smoke. Also, on some level, you have to question, if those military bases from the United States weren't there, would those governments even be able to maintain themselves? If you remember, Donald Trump that made the point one day that, Saudi Arabia only exists because the United States allows it to exist, that if we weren't protecting them, the government will go up in smoke. Interesting. One last point before I close this video out. Russia. In my show yesterday, especially at the end, there was a lot of, I would call it angst, anger coming from that angst. Because it's very clear at this point that Iran decided it wanted to be a lone wolf. Lone wolves get eaten by larger packs, but they wanted to be a lone wolf. Putin, at one point, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because Argachi is in Moscow. And he's in Moscow as a direct result of the war that they're currently in. Now, the moment that the United States hits Iran, Iran knew in advance that the United States was involved. But at some point, that government actually believed that despite the fact that Israel had murdered hundreds of thousands of Arab Muslims, despite the fact that they were racist, hateful, bigoted, and had a fascist government that had no issue dehumanizing those Muslims, despite the fact that U.S. policy has been to knock down one government after the next all throughout the Middle East. Hell, they wrote it down in policy papers. And in physical matter reality, you can see it. Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria. And now we're knocking at your door because all of these other governments have fallen. Lebanon, pacified Hezbollah. We're knocking at your door. I guess they thought that they can handle all of Europe, the U.S., and Israel by itself. I don't know why they thought that. It's brave, but there's a lot of brave people in the cemetery. And Iran is an extremely important government for it to maintain. Meaning, even if the internal dynamics of the government change, like, not necessarily religious theocracy, it is important that it remains sovereign. I hope that makes sense. And sovereign in the context of itself, not a putsch, not an overthrow, not a failed state, not turning it into Libya or something like that, but it remains itself, especially in the context of a larger geopolitical structure. Now, Iran may want to function as an individual. Fair enough. But you must understand that the rest of the world is not functioning as individual states, per se. Those states have lumped in with other states with this notion of a larger geopolitical order that larger geopolitical order being the West, who wants to maintain hegemonic control, economic, military, etc., and the rest of the world that wants multipolarity. Iran is very important in the context of that multipolarity and allowing itself to be preyed upon because it doesn't want nukes, because it doesn't want to create military structures and alliances, is a dereliction of duty in regards to the country and its poor leadership of the country, meaning the Pezeshkian government is naive, weak, and it's unfortunate that he was the one that got in power, which is the reason why many people believe that Raisi was murdered, and Iran didn't want to bring up the fact that he was murdered. However, the fact that the US attacked them and they realize they're alone in a hostile world has brought them to seemingly a come to Jesus moment where Argachi has now gone to Russia. Please, sir, can you help us out? Because the monsters are at our door. Now, Putin, being a nice guy, didn't say, so you can't negotiate with that monster, huh? You can't negotiate with that monster. He's not going to say that. But you can tell that there's a certain amount of annoyance because a lot of people have been screaming at Russia and China, oh my God, the multipolar world is being attacked. Iran is a huge piece in that. What are you doing to help Iran? There are multiple points in this. The first point, and I'll just show this one first. When Putin is confronted with this question and answers it directly with a heaping amount of annoyance. And then I'm going to show you Argachi in Moscow, because there's an exchange that takes place on camera and there's a look that he gives. You'll see what I mean. Let's go to this first. Putin has answered this question directly. Hey, what are you doing to help this country? Because, you know, they seem to be by themselves in a hostile world.
We support Iran in its struggle for its legitimate interests, including the interests with respect to peaceful uses of the atomic energy. And this has always been our position. This is our principled position, including in this conflict. It has never changed. And those who claim that we should have done more, well, what more? You know, starting some military operations or what? I mean, we already engage in military operations against those who we consider to be opponents of the ideas and concepts we promote.
He's obviously annoyed. He's obviously annoyed, right? It's like, what do you expect us to do? Now, part of his annoyance has to be for this also. Here's another one where something was dropped that, I got to be honest, shocked a lot of people, including myself. My mouth hit the floor. And if you're wondering why I have this level of annoyance, it's kind of the reason he's annoyed. Dude, you're in a hostile world. They're trying to destroy you. They have policy papers where they're openly talking about destroying you. The same policy papers point out, hey, let's pretend to have negotiations. Let's allow Israel to attack. Let's get further involved into the conflict. Meaning all of this stuff has been planned out. And you can look at what happened to all of these other countries in the region that makes it pretty clear that the objective was never peace talks. The objective was a continuation of the objective of destroying all of these nations, reshaping the Middle East using American power. You are the last domino in that. You should act accordingly, as opposed to acting the way that you're acting with a certain amount of hopium that you can reason with the vampire with blood on its mouth. This is, what's the way it says here?
Мы когда-то предлагали нашим иранским друзьям поработать в области системы ПВО. Ну, так большого интереса тогда партнеры не проявили, ну и все. Что касается договора, о котором сказали, о стратегическом партнерстве, там нет статей, связанных с оборонной сферой. Это второе. А третье, наши иранские друзья об этом и не просят.
To be clear, what he just said was, we cooperate with our Iranian friends. We asked them once, twice, 3 times. They did not want a partnership. They didn't want our air defense. They didn't want any of that stuff. They didn't want it. So it wasn't that it wasn't offered. It was offered. Iran continuously, over and over and over again, turned it down. All right. New day, right? New day. Coming to Jesus. Coming to Jesus. And now, as your buildings get attacked, now as you've lost 600-700 people, something that, by the way, air defense would have most likely prevented, or at the very least lowered the death penalty, meaning people would still be here. Man, let me nail that shit down. Because I don't want you to think I'm just being a dick to Iran. Russian air defense is the best in the world. The U.S. doesn't really focus on air defense because it assumes that it's going to have air superiority in any conflict. Russian air defense is some of the best in the world. How many people will still be alive if Iran, 8 months ago, a year ago, accepted the offer for air defense? Interesting question, right? How many people will still be alive if the defensive shield of Russia extended into Iran? Would Israel even be willing to attack Iran under the model that there is a missile that Russia would militarily get involved to assist, and that the nuclear missile shield will most likely be over top of Iran, just by definition? Would this war be happening? I'm trying to point out these are bad choices in the case of Iran. And these bad choices, yes, have been responsible. Israel is responsible for the murder of these people. So be very clear. But obviously, better choices would have mitigated the casualties, would have mitigated potentially the war in and of itself, especially if Russia didn't fall in Ukraine, which they didn't. I'm saying these are bad choices, especially since you're in a position where you had to come to Jesus anyway. This is Aragachi in Moscow now that the attacks and the war has started. This is a conversation.
Рад, что вы сегодня в Москве.
من خیلی خوشحالم از اینکه شما امروز در مسکو هستید.
Это даст возможность нам обсудить все эти острые темы и вместе подумать на тему о том, как
Okay, that's not helpful. Basically, what Putin is saying here is we can think about together how to get you out of the situation to which you find yourself. And I want you to see Aragachi's face at the very end of whatever is being said, because I am fascinated by what this expression is. This, right there, right there. Keep watching. Keep watching. He seems a bit uncomfortable in the situation, at least to me. And I know there's a cultural difference, so fair enough. But as Putin is saying, look, we're going to see how to get you out of this situation, he seems uncomfortable. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. I don't know. But you finally got to this point where you come to ask the Russians for help after eschewing their help over and over and over again. That's a good thing, by the way, with one caveat. If you are working in tandem in union with another country especially when that country is a powerhouse, you lose agency to some degree. Now, is that the reason that Iran refused the missile systems? Is that the reason that Iran refused the defensive alliance? We want agency. We want our own independent policy, not our own independent foreign policy. I accept that. And it's very possible that the Russians may have a different point of view in regards to what Iran wants to do. For example, what if Iran wants to teach Israel a lesson in this? What if they don't want to end the conflict and they want to continue to hit in an attrition war? Do you lose agency if you're getting help from the Russians? I don't know. Does Iran believe they lose agency in it? I don't know. Meaning, let's think together, how do you get you out of the situation? What does that mean? What does that mean? Right? So I kind of get where they're coming from. It's not really about your wants anymore. You are defending the integrity of your state. And there are attacks that are being leveled at you from A, a superpower, and B, its client, with a superpower that is going to get more and more into the conflict as this conflict goes on. The integrity of the state is at risk. So we'll see. I mean, the question becomes, what can Russia do in this situation? Right. Now, Pezeshkian answered this. Not Pezeshkian, Peskov answered this. Peskov made the point of saying it kind of depends on what the Iranians need. Right here. And this will be the last part before I close. He points out right here, DD Geopolitics, Sarah Bills, she's awesome.
Все зависит от того, что необходимо Ирану. Мы предложили наши посреднические усилия. Это конкретно мы заявили о своей позиции. Это тоже очень важное проявление и очень важное, собственно, это такой вид поддержки иранской стороны. Ну и дальше все будет зависеть от того, что сейчас необходимо Ирану. Все зависит от того, что необходимо Ирану. Мы предложили наши посредники.
He said, look, we offered our mediation efforts. We expressed our position. This stuff kind of depends on what Iran needs. Well, and it depends on what Iran wants. I suspect that they actually do want to teach Israel a lesson. I could be wrong. I suspect that they want to focus it directly at Israel. I also suspect, though, that they know that the U.S. wants to get further involved. And I suspect that they know that the U.S. wants to create the conditions for a coup to take place. The question is, does the Iranian government and the public be able to stand strong where there's not this Syria effect of the defense collapsing? Israel tried to do something like this. This is being reported today, right here, where Israel, fascists, racists, sociopaths, threatened to kill the women and children and the family members of Iranian officials. Amazing, right? We'll hit you, your family, your children, everyone with the dirt. I only call to tell you, as long as there's time, effectively, they want these people to abandon Ayatollah. Just amazing. So, that is where we are. That is the latest. That is a breakdown of why Iran attacked in the way that they did. Donald Trump is effectively saying, look, no harm, no foul. We didn't get hurt. He gave us a heads up. We can call it a day. We should have peace. Is that what Iran wants? Is that what Iran wants? I suppose we'll see. I suspect the answer is going to be no. I suspect as long as they get the opportunity to hit Israel, they will take the opportunity to hit Israel. And they will be willing to absorb what Israel sends back. Maybe. I could be wrong. I mean, maybe they want more space and time in order to prepare for something later on. But we should be very clear. The goal and objective, whether it's now, whether it's 5 years from now, is the destruction of the Iranian state. They've waited 20 years for this. Waiting another 5 may not necessarily be off the table. Iran has to know that, and they have to respond and act accordingly. I will leave it at that. Let's see who we have here. Luis Brooks, super sticker. Thank you, Luis Brooks. Thank you for that. And Trump says ceasefire agreed by Iran and Israel. We'll see. We'll see. I got to be honest with you. I don't really believe anything that comes out of Trump's mouth. So we will see. It's possible, especially if they're working in coordination with the Russians. And Russia's like, we don't need another fire. We don't need another fire. Who knows? I don't know. It really does depend on what Iran wants. And I got to be honest, I don't entirely know what they want. An argument can be made that they want to teach Israel a lesson. They could say, well, we taught them a lesson. Or it could be, we're sick of this. Let's call it today. Rebuild, repair, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I honestly don't know. There are a lot of questions around it. I do know, again, whether it's 1 year, whether it's 5 years, the objective has not changed to destroy the state. And Iran may have presented itself to be too strong of a target for that to happen, in which case they back away, kind of like in Ukraine, where they want to freeze the conflict and come back to the conflict later, or like Syria, where they freeze the conflict and come back into the conflict later. The fact that Israel still exists is an existential threat to the existence of Iran. So any ceasefire is just a frozen conflict. Nothing has changed in regards to wanting the destruction of the state. So I don't know. We'll see. I wouldn't be shocked either way, to be honest, because I don't know what their intentions are. All right, I'm going to call this a day. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. I'm going to say subscribe. And I will see you guys bright and early tomorrow morning. Have a good one all. Be safe.